Well, hope is different from optimism in the sense that hope takes seriously what we're up against. Like, it takes seriously the tragic character of what we're facing in an age like this. It is tough-minded, and yet it pushes through that and says we keep moving. You know, so that's the spirit out of which, you know, I do my work. I was John Lewis's pastor. He didn't have any reason to think that he could win crossing that bridge with brute force under the color of law on the other side of that bridge. Hope keeps walking. And so we have to keep pushing, keep walking. And I wrote this book, which is really a sermon in the public square as we approach the nation's 250th anniversary, because we have a fundamental question in front of us as Americans. What kind of country do we want to be? And I would hope that we wouldn't be so locked into our tribalistic silos that there's no basis upon which to even have reasonable conversation. Bill Pulte couldn't get through the Senate. And remember that this is the same Senate that confirmed RFK to head Health and Human Services. It's the same Senate that confirmed Hegseth to be the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of War, as he prefers to call it. And yet they said that Pulte is a bridge too far. He is obviously unqualified. His only qualification is that he is good at bringing up bogus criminal charges against Trump's political opponent. So Americans on both sides of the aisle, regardless of your politics, we have to recognize that it's a dangerous world. And we're talking about American national security, so we can have these arguments that we have as a family. And yet he continues to push this. Clearly, Donald Trump is much more focused on his own political agenda and holding on to his own power. The country be damned. And it seems to me that Democrats and Republicans ought to stand up and say this is too much. And Americans at home ought to be asking themselves, do they feel safe having somebody who shouldn't be anywhere near intelligence firing the intelligence professionals?
Senator, you've done a masterful job of winning over people from both camps statewide in Georgia a number of times. I'm a political junkie. I'm obsessed with the Kemp-Warnock voter. That's Republican Governor Brian Kemp, Democratic Senator Raphael.
You got everything right except the order.
Warnock, Kemp. I was going alphabetical. But you have done a masterful job of going and getting working class males, going after white college-educated viewers to the suburbs that ordinarily would vote Republican. And you've gone into rural areas. And you even had an ad about peanuts that I want to play. It shows you your range here.
Every year, 772 billion of these are grown in Georgia.
That's nuts.
That's over half of America's peanuts.
Very nuts.
So when foreign countries tried to block us from selling our crops, we needed someone to fight back.
That's why I partnered with a Republican senator from Alabama to eliminate the regulations and stand up for farmers. I'm Raphael Warnock, and I approve this message because I'll do anything if it means helping Georgia.
Now that's really nuts.
So there you are. You're a United States Senator. You're the esteemed Reverend from Ebenezer Baptist Church. And there you are, knee-deep in peanuts. What can the Democratic Party learn from you?
Look, you just have to go out and talk to the folks. And, you know, folks said that this is Georgia, and they said, you're going to these rural red districts? Of course. I'm a pastor, and the pastor attends to all of the people. I promised the people of Georgia that I would walk with them even as I work for them. I cannot tell you all of the counties that I've gone in when their hospital is about to close because, you know, of these draconian cuts. They passed the one big ugly bill last summer. It cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid, calling it waste, fraud, and abuse. If you got a big government bureaucracy, is there some waste, fraud, and abuse? Sure. But that didn't stop them from giving ICE $70 billion a couple of weeks ago. And so I continue to stand up for Georgians. The American story is a complicated story. As the pastor, I do everything I can to remind us when I can that at the end of the day, we are all we've got. We're stuck with each other. And so let's have the arguments. You know, let's have the robust arguments that we have in a democracy, and then let's figure out a way to go forward. I think Americans are soul weary because they're seeing the ways in which Washington is stuck, because there are structural issues that encourage the kind of tribalism that we're seeing, gerrymandering, dark money in our politics, the ways in which the primary is the whole game. And what I try to do in this sermon, The Crooked Places Made Straight, is to get us to reimagine who we can be as we approach our 250th anniversary.
So let's talk about some of those crooked places and the effort to make them straight. Your book subtitles Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. You note in the book about the history of Christian hypocrisy. Quote, "It might seem odd that as a pastor, I'm not automatically heartened when I hear that Christians are at the negotiating table. That's because I am, too, a student of history. And I know that in some way, some of this country's crucial moments, Christians have stood on the wrong side of justice." At the core of a sentence like that, there is a moral meaning. There is a moral component. You talk about the foundation and framework in which we get to fight for things that matter. Help me understand that moral component. There's a lot of policy thrown about here on the table over the last few minutes. Connect the audience, the reader, the American, the Georgian, to the moral component of this moment and why, at the core, you wrote this book.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just about the policy. Help me understand that.
Well, it's my faith that got me into this messy work of politics in the first place, and it is a messy business. But I've always had a kind of worldly faith that takes you into the fray. Mm-hmm. You know, I've been fighting on these issues around health care, voting rights, mass incarceration, climate change, you know, making sure that every child has a chance. That's the work that I've been talking about for years, long before I knew I was going to run. And for me, I always want to ask the moral question, because if we're just stuck in the argument about who's going to get partisan advantage, we don't get anywhere.
Right.
And Isaiah, which is the basis for the whole book, has been an important guide for me in the very first chapter. And I promise I won't turn this into a Bible study.
No, you can't. No, I actually, in a sense, I actually want you to, because I think the moral piece is an important part that's missing for a lot of folks.
So in the very first chapter of Isaiah, he says, "Your princes," which means politicians, "your princes are rebels. They are companions of thieves." He says, no, everybody's looking for a bribe. And they do not defend the orphan or the widow. Those are the folks who are part of the social safety net. The most marginalized members of that community, the prophet says, the reason why they can't get what they get is because the princes, the politicians, are focused on their own selfish ambition. He could have been talking about politics in 21st century America, where our politics is just overwhelmed by money, particularly since Citizens United. And so for me, this is an opportunity for the pastor who serves in the Senate to speak to the nation, to remind us that I believe that democracy is itself a moral project. It is messy. It is imperfect. But Reinhold Niebuhr said that humankind's capacity for justice makes democracy possible. Its capacity for injustice makes democracy necessary.
Right.
And so as the people's voices are squeezed out of their democracy, we're seeing a concentration of wealth at the top, and we're seeing people struggling at the bottom and in the middle. And I believe we can do better than this as a country. I still believe in the country. And part of what the demagogues are trying to get us to do is to lower our expectations about what is possible, to get focused on those other people, whoever they are.
Yep.
Meanwhile, they're moving money from the bottom to the top. For me, that's not a political problem alone. It's a moral issue, and I'm calling all of us to account for it.